Hello there, everybody. Sheehan back here with another edition of the Sheehan Show. And today I'm again joined by Brad Wharton as we look ahead to Cage Warriors 132, which is going down next week. If you haven't seen our preview for Cage Warriors 131, please check that out over on the Sherdog YouTube channel and on Sherdog.com as well. But Double Trouble, as you're calling it this time, Brad, it's going to be another fun one, I know, coming up here. First of all, before we get into that, we talked a little bit on the other episode about the past trilogies and things like that. But for you yourself, like sitting there as a commentator, having to work out, and I suppose this feels like it may be a little bit of a break for you, having to only do 2 cards, but having to prepare for that many fighters, for that many fights, it must take a lot of preparation and a long time to do it for you.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of like note taking. I prefer just to kind of have things in my head, but during these trilogy events, kind of had to, because there's just so much going on. There's up to 30 fights in the space of 72 hours. It's absolutely crazy. So it's nice. It's nice just having to do 2. It'll be nicer just doing 1 next year. Hopefully, means I don't have to carry 3 sets of jackets, 3 sets of shoes, and 3 different pairs of pants to every Cage Warriors event as well.
The way you dress, I know that's probably a tough
exactly.
thing. Planning alone.
It's costing me a fortune, these trilogies, honestly.
Graham, you'll have to up that fee there. You'll have to up that wage bracket. But yeah, it's I can only imagine. Like even going to events around here, it takes a lot going to events, and I feel like sometimes we don't give enough credit to the people like yourself covering the event and the crew there covering it and everyone doing it. So it's fair play to you for providing us with this fantastic service and another fantastic card again, obviously at Cage Warriors 132. I'm going to start straight away at the main event here. Dominique Wooding versus Carlos Abreu. I was looking up Carlos Abreu. Don't know too much about him now, to be honest, looking through his record and stuff, but obviously Dominique Wooding has been around for a long time, and Dominique Wooding's a guy, he's fought in Ireland a couple of times, so I've seen him, and sometimes for me, when I see guys up close and I see something about him, I look at him like, I gain kind of a soft spot for him and like keep following their careers. And Dominique Wooding is one of those guys where, sometimes you think, oh well, maybe just because I've seen him a few times, I'm maybe overestimating or something, but then he reaches like this place in his career where he's turning into a fighter that I thought he could be when I saw him in the early days of his career, and he's turned into like a really fantastic fighter who I think who could go all the way to the UFC and who could be a really good Cage Warriors fighter, but go on and onto the next level as well. First of all, what do you think of Dominique Wooding as a fighter himself and where he has gotten to, and also Carlos Abreu in that matchup?
Well, I have been calling Dom Wooding's fight for a long, long time, going back to when he was a teenager competing on the amateur circuit in the UK. He had an incredible amateur run. I think he ended up like 10-2 or 11-2 or something, and he beat some really, really good guys. And he beat a lot of guys that people were really highly regarding at the time, and he went straight through them. So seeing his progression has been incredible. He had some fights early on in his pro career that were maybe a little bit too soon for him, fighting a guy like Andy Young that early in his career was probably just a little bit too soon. And, Andy Young probably beat him on experience that night, which is fair enough. You'd expect that. He's had some tough fights. He's picked up a couple of losses. He's picked up some incredible highlight reel wins. I think every win he's got is by knockout. And that mainly stretches back to amateur as well. But he's coming into his own now. I think that fight against Nathan Fletcher just showed how much he's matured as a fighter. Nathan Fletcher fought a perfect fight, and the patience that Wooding showed, hanging in there despite getting taken down, despite being put on the fence, and just waiting for that gap. And when you've got that power that he's got and that ability to find the gaps with your shots, you only need one, right? And he was able to wait till the 3rd round, 4th round. So this kid's got a ton of potential. If you look at his social media, I believe he said that there were a couple of guys in the Cage Warriors roster that turned this fight down. So that's kind of interesting, and fair play to Carlos for stepping in. He stepped in a couple of weeks before the fight. So this is a game guy. Carlos as well signed a long-term deal with Cage Warriors. So, he's not just coming in here just to get a quick payday before Christmas, right?
Mm-hmm.
This guy's got serious designs. And if you can upset the champ on your debut, that's a big way to get yourself noticed, especially on a promotion like Cage Warriors. Does not have the...
His record's pretty good too. Like, if you look at the guys he's fought, like 8-1, 7-2, 7-3. For a guy still really young in his career, that's a lot of experience to be beating and taking on, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think his only loss in the last 5 years was by decision. So this isn't a guy that, is going out getting stopped regularly. So this is going to be very interesting. He's a slightly older guy, so he's been training, you would imagine, a bit longer than Dom. So it's going to be interesting to see that kind of veteran experience against the maturing Wooding. Look, the interesting thing for me about this one as well is how the crowd reacts to Wooding this time, because that last fight against Fletcher was, you might as well have been in Liverpool. It was a pro-Fletcher crowd in Wooding's hometown. But that win that Wooding got, I think that's going to have turned a lot of people onto him. So I'm expecting him to have, a huge backing in the arena. And this could be that breakout moment for him on Cage Warriors.
Mm-hmm. We spoke on the last podcast about maybe Oban Elliott or someone coming through as maybe the next star. And, you have the likes of Paul Hughes and others as well. Do you think Dominic Wooding could be that next star? Like, as you said in the last fight, he was maybe the heel a little bit, but he kind of turned it around, I think, towards the end, and even when he quieted maybe the Liverpool fans and the London fans came through. Could he be the next star from Cage Warriors?
I think anyone with the kind of record that Dom Wooding's got, the skills and the ability that he's got to just shut people off like that, people who like fights are going to want to tune in to watch you fight, regardless of, what you're saying outside the cage and what you're doing on social media. If you're smashing people that way, that's the kind of fight that a fan wants to see as the last fight on the card before they get home. That's the kind of fight they want to talk about on the tube or on the bus going home. Dom's got all the tools. And like we've said, he's had those tough fights early in his career. He's in an incredible spot now. I don't think the momentum could be any more behind him to make a star-making performance in December.
100%. I really can't wait for that. He's one of those guys I always look out for if his name is on the card, as I mentioned. And I'm really looking forward to that main event. And to finish it off, like, I think, talking about the star making, this is a star making position. No, he is the headlining act of the weekend. If he can get the win there, it's huge for him. But as you mentioned for Abreu as well, he's coming in there as a live underdog. And if he can get that win, he not only announces himself on the Cage Warriors scene, he announces himself on, the worldwide scene, if you want to put it that way, being on Fight Pass and everything. That's an absolutely huge opportunity. And as you could take it from two people here who've watched Ian Dean's work for a long, long time, he's not putting a guy in here unless he believes he's well able for that situation, as we've seen it down through the years with so many other people coming through. Even Gomis in the last one as well was another guy we were like, oh well, and we'll speak about Harila soon, but that, I think that shocked everyone. But it's just like, well, it's Ian Dean again. So Abreu could be one of those guys as well coming through here. Let's talk about the co-main event, because this one, if we want to talk about drama, if we want to talk about what's going on outside of the cage, if we want to talk about backstory, this is the one here. I let you explain it, but obviously they fought, was it 2 trilogies ago, or the last trilogy, and Creasy ended up getting the win, but what happened? Tell us, Brad. Explain it to us.
Well, so it was the headline fight of the entire last trilogy. So the last fight of the last ever trilogy. So it was a big spot for these guys to have, and it was the finals of the flyweight tournament. Both guys had arguably career best wins in the semi-finals of that tournament, and it was a huge final going into that weekend. Now, Shanks missed weight. I know he's one of those guys. I've talked about it before, who will be perfect for 130 pound division rather. He's got the stockiness of a bantamweight and the height of a flyweight. So he's kind of like hovering between divisions, but he missed weight by a couple of pounds. So he wasn't eligible to win the belt. The fight starts and he gets an armbar locked in very early. Creasy gets out of the armbar. The fight continues. Both guys did some really good work. I thought Shanks was probably up on the scorecards. He'd bloodied Creasy up a little bit. I think he busted his nose. But Creasy came back, got the win in the third round. Really poetic for me, because it's his third time fighting for the belt, and the previous 2 occasions he'd lost in the third round. So great to see Sam, a consummate martial artist, a long-time member of the Cage Warriors flyweight division. Great to see him raise the belt. Now, I didn't see it at the time, but as soon as the fight finished, Daniel Strauss, my co-commentator, turned to me and said, I think he tapped. And if you watch the Cage Warriors footage back, I don't mention it, but Dan kind of says, oh, that was close. Since that, another camera angle's come out, I believe from a member of Shanks' corner, and it certainly does look like there was a tap from Sam Creasy. So, there's a couple of ways of looking at this. Way number one is when you train and you're in the gym, you're taught that when you feel a tap, you let go. So it's instinct. The other way of thinking about it is this is a prize fight, and the last instruction you get off the referee is fight until I tell you to stop. So there's that. Should Shanks have let go? Or was it a case that Creasy tapped as he was letting go? Who knows? I think a rematch is the right thing to do, given the situation. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Shanks now to make sure he makes that weight this time, because if he doesn't make the weight this time, that's a disaster, and it will be tough to see him getting another opportunity at the belt, even if he does win. So he's going to get that out of the way first. Look, he's got a great team behind him. James Doolan, one of the top coaches in the European circuit at the moment. I'm sure those guys have addressed that issue, and they're going to have him on point. But look, if there's a bit of controversy, let's clear it up.
It's one as well that, like you mentioned there, even if Shanks wins, if he misses weight, he might never fight for the title again. Like Creasy, as you mentioned, he lost 2 opportunities for the title before this. One in these circumstances. If he was to lose again, like, it's going to be hard for him to get another title shot, or it's going to be hard to get a rematch because of the way the first fight ended. If Shanks wins clean, let's say, it's one of those fights where it's like, sometimes we go into every fight thinking fighter A and fighter B is going to fight. Either A will win or B will win, and we'll move forward. This is one of those ones where there are so many different integers, there's so many different things could happen. It's really, really tough to kind of calculate what's going to happen here. But I think in the last fight, Shanks went in as kind of the favourite, I suppose, before the weigh-ins and before that kind of happened. And when Creasy won, I think a lot of people are like, oh, look, when anyone misses weight and you can't win the championship title, I think when the other guy wins, there's always, even if you're a neutral or whatever, there's always like the sense of, oh, good, the title isn't going to be, vacant, or the title isn't going to be put back into the ether or whatever. And especially for a guy like Creasy, who, is probably going to be in Cage Warriors for another while, and who has been a constant in Cage Warriors and is very, very good. And, it felt like the culmination maybe of his Cage Warriors career in terms of the contender run in his career. And then this kind of happened. So, like, Creasy will have that. This is supposed to be the kind of crowning moment of this part of his career anyway. And I was kind of ripped from him a little bit. And now, obviously Shanks will have to have a chance to right that wrong. So this one, there's no need to write a storyline for it. Like, the storyline's already written, and even the fight itself, Creasy won the first fight. Obviously, you can say what you want about it, but like it was and Shanks was doing so well. So the rematch was one we'd want to see anyway. I think a lot of people are even talking about it anyway. So it's really, really fun. I'm really, really looking forward to this. Like, this could be the main event again, I think. But putting Wooding in the main event slot, I don't have any problem with that either. But it's this is the one that I'll be 100% tuning in for live to see what happens in this one. And probably I'll be tuning in the day before as well to see what happens in the weigh-in, just to make sure it all goes well. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. Let's talk about the Figlak brothers. Both guys are obviously on the card. Mateusz Figlak against Ken Kauppinen, and Stevie McIntosh is fighting Mike Figlak. Let's first of all talk about, I want to start calling him Big Matt Figlak. I think that's a good nickname for him, against Ken Kauppinen. Honestly, if you had told me Figlak versus Kauppinen, I was like, what? Like, when I heard that first, I'm like, and then I thought about it, and it's like, that's a good fucking fight. That is a really, really good fight. What do you think of that one? Like, Ken Kauppinen was up at middleweight, and now he's obviously coming down. This at 170, isn't it? It is, yeah. He's coming down to 170. He always seemed to me like, when I saw him fighting, obviously in Cage Warriors, and he fought Will Fleury before he came to Cage Warriors, I wouldn't say he's an undersized 185 pounder. Like, I don't think I think he'd be a huge 170er. And obviously Figlak as well. We saw him against Ian Garry in terms of size. Ian Garry's a huge 170er, and Figlak was a similar size to him. So this is going to be a tough weight cut as well, I'd say, for both of them. But a titanic fight. This is a tough fight for Figlak, isn't it? And for Kauppinen as well. But it's an interesting test.
You know, this fight is what I like to call the Ian Dean special, because you did not know you wanted it, but when you see it, you're like, yeah, that's going to be good. That's going to be a lot of fun. Look, I was really surprised as well, because, like, you know, Kent came in and he had that great debut against Jamie Richardson, who just challenged for the belt. And he put on a really good performance, dropped Jamie towards the end of the fight. And, you know, you think that with that Cage Warriors middleweight division kind of reordering itself at the moment, Kent might have got the next title shot, or he might have just had to win one more to get a title shot. So interesting to see him going down to 170. Bear in mind, he's fought light heavyweight as well. He fought Manhoef for light heavyweight. So be interesting to see how he looks when he gets down there. But it's a great fight for Figlak at this point in his career, because Kent has been around the block. He's fought a lot of guys. He's got international experience. He's got experience against international opponents. He's got a lot of boxing as well outside of MMA. He boxes a lot. He's got a lot of rounds under his belt. So this isn't a guy who's going to be surprised by anything. This is a good, solid hand, and a guy who, you know, could come in and beat the prospect in Figlak, and all of a sudden people are talking about him in terms of the Cage Warriors welterweight title picture as well, which is obviously vacant recently with Ian Gary moving on to the UFC. For Figlak, this is the kind of guy you've got to beat to elevate yourself to that level from prospect to contender. And I think, you know, we talked about both the Figlaks, the Hardwicks as well. You know, there's no reason why any of those guys couldn't be fighting for titles in, obviously we've got one Hardwick fighting for a title on Friday night, but there's no reason why the other three couldn't be fighting for titles in the next 12 months. And this is that next step for Figlak.
100%, yeah, and it is the step. Like, it'll be hard to deny him a title fight. I know a few people were kind of saying, "Oh, maybe it's a little bit early for him in his career." And we saw, you know, what happened against Ian Gary. But Ian Gary is like Ian Gary, you know. Ian Gary is a level at an extreme level. But I think it's weird since that fight, and you know, since maybe the Oban Elliott fight against Mike, I just feel like they've taken kind of that step forward and kind of seen the level, you know, where you kind of need to get to, and both of them are really good. And Mike, I know you always talk about Stevie McIntosh, and I always talk about how good of a fighter he is, and when we've spoken in the past, tough fight as well for Mike Figlak, and you know, I think it's, you know, testament to maybe where he is in his career as well, but that should be a fun fight.
Yeah, look, you know, whenever you've got two guys who are willing to just stand in front of each other and just do whatever, it's always going to be fun. You know, both these guys have got really good striking. Both these guys good on the ground as well. You know, look, Figlak's had, you know, perhaps an easier ride than some over the COVID period when people weren't training. Because obviously you've got a brother who's, you know, maybe only like 10 pounds heavier than you. What a perfect training partner. They both live together. They can train all day, every day. And they may not have been affected as much as other people who don't have someone in the bubble that they could train with over the last 18 months. So I think both of the Figlaks have, you know, they've come on leaps and bounds. You can see their improvements every time. But again, you know, McIntosh is a good hand himself. So I don't think either of these guys could, should, or will be going into this expecting any kind of walkover. I think it's going to be a real good old-fashioned fist fight. I think it's going to get bloody, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, I can't wait. I'd have to mention Tobias Harila as well, because, you know, he's fighting Jair Jr. here. I spoke a minute ago about the featherweights, and, you know, obviously we'll have the title fight coming up between the two champions, and then we have Jair and Gomis as well. I don't know where he is at the moment, but, you know, Harila was kind of the guy coming into the last trilogy where everyone was saying, okay, well, there's another three guys there, but this is the guy who's going to come in and kind of overtake them all, maybe. And that's kind of been put in the back burner now after he's lost in the last fight. But the fact that none of those three guys are fighting on the duology, which I'm going to continue to call it, he has a bit of, even though he lost in his last fight, he has a bit of an advantage, doesn't he? That he can come in here, get a big win again, and kind of put his name back in that title picture. It's a big fight for him, isn't it?
It's huge, you know. He came in and he had such a dominant display against a really good guy, Nathan Stephen, in his Cage Warriors debut. Second fight, he had that crazy entrance with the, you know, the boiler suit and all the theatrics and everything else. But this is a guy who gets it, right? He gets it inside the cage, and he gets what you have to do outside of the cage to get noticed. This division, man, it's crazy. You've got two champions, Vucenic and Hughes. You've got Morgan Charrier just behind them. Any of those three guys could put their hand up and say on any given day they're the best fighter in that division, right? And I think if all three just fought each other on repeat, you probably get a lot of different results. And for me, Harila's one of those guys who's chasing the pack. He's right behind them. And one big win could be all it needs. Obviously, that Gomes fight was a tough one for him. Gomes was able to just hit and move and get away from him. And look, that's the perfect fight to fight. You don't want to stand in front of Tobias Harila. You're going to get hit really hard, or you're going to get dumped on your back, and then you're going to get hit really hard. So, Gomes fought a great fight. Not really sure what's up with him, if we're going to see him again next year. I hope we will. But look, Harila is going to be a star. So, look, he's got that loss. Fine. Let's move on from that. He seems to have taken a really mature approach. He didn't come out of it with sour grapes. He just said, yeah, okay, I'm not going to let that happen again. And when a guy who's that self-assured says something like that, you've got to believe it. Look, again, Ian Dean's not putting anyone in there who he thinks is going to get blown out of the water. I think it would be a huge mistake for Harila to underestimate his opponent on Saturday night. I'm sure he's not going to. But I'm expecting a big performance, both on the way to the cage and when the cage door closes from Tobias Harila.
I'm almost looking forward to on the way to the cage more. That's just going to be really fun. But yeah, it's fantastic. Other than that, in this card, Jamie Richardson is on the card. Aaron Abbey versus Samir Fadin, I believe, is on this card as well. Paul McBain. Oh, there's this card is really, really good. Wow, is there anything in that undercard maybe that I'm overtaking quickly there that you're really looking forward to, or that people should be tuning in for?
I mean, Tanio Pagliariccio and Aiden James should be a great fight. Hearing a lot of good things about Pagliariccio. I'm going to do some tape study on him this week. Look, we know what James is all about. We've seen him on various platforms, and he had a great debut on Cage Warriors last time out. And, when people talk about, potential future stars for Cage Warriors, I think in 6 to 12 months' time, Aiden James is going to have his name in that conversation as well. So that's definitely a reason to tune in early. Paul McBain versus Commande. Look, Commande is a spoiler. He is one of those guys. I mean, you've really got to look to the likes of Mason Jones and Jack Shaw for guys that have beat him and look really good. Anything less, you're going to have a hard time with this guy. He's the quintessential journeyman in the most respectful sense, in that he will give you 3 hard rounds. You'll have to earn that win against him. He's awkward. He's tenacious, and I think against a guy like Paul McBain, who's just out-and-out violence, who's going to come straight at him, throwing those leg kicks, throwing the knees and elbows, that's got all the ingredients for a really, really fun fight on the undercard.
100%. I can't wait for it. I can't wait for all of these 20 fights or wherever it might be. And Dean has done it again. He always does a fantastic job. Brad, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Everyone, check out the fights on UFC Fight Pass coming up this weekend. Cage Warriors always put on a fantastic show inside the cage, but on the commentary and everything as well. And the pacing of Cage Warriors is just the best. You can watch the whole card in about half an hour. Absolutely fantastic. Brad, thanks very much for joining me. Thanks everybody for listening. My name is Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and I'll see you all